DJI Osmo Pocket 3 versus the new Osmo 360. Let's see which one produces better image quality in a couple of different scenarios. First of all, I'm going to start with a test here in the studio, basically emulating a low light scene. And right now I'm using the single lens mode on the Osmo 360, just because I feel like this mode produces slightly better image quality than the 360 mode, but I am going to switch to the 360 mode soon. And also, I'm using the highest video quality settings on both of these cameras, just to push them to their absolute limits. And I also use manual exposure on both of these cameras, just to keep it as precise as possible, but I will switch to automatic exposure after this test. More specifically, I'm using 1/100 shutter speed on both of these cameras. And the reason for that is because I feel like this is the bare minimum I would use in a low light scene when using a 360 camera or an action camera, because if you go any lower, it will dramatically affect the stabilization performance. And then I only use the ISO on both of these cameras to basically get myself to a correct exposure of plus 0.0 EV. And more specifically, I'm using ISO 3200 on the Osmo 360 and then ISO 1600 on the Osmo Pocket 3. So let's see which one performs better in this scene. And now here is the same test, but with automatic exposure on both of these cameras. Let's go to a darker area in my room, just to push them to their limits. And now I'm using the 360 mode on the Osmo 360 with the best image quality settings and manual exposure, just again to keep it as, precise, I guess, as possible. And now here it is with automatic exposure on both cameras. All right, and here is how they compare with their low light filming modes. I'm using low light mode on the DJI Pocket 3 with automatic exposure. And unfortunately with this mode, you cannot use tracking, so the camera is not going to track me around. And then I'm using the SuperNight mode on the Osmo 360, also with automatic exposure, but the white balance on both of these cameras is set to 5200 Kelvin, just to keep it as, accurate as possible when it comes to the colors and stuff like that. Let's start with the outdoor tests. I'm using the single lens mode on the Osmo 360 with automatic exposure on both cameras. And while I do this test, I want to briefly talk about stabilization and tracking. The Pocket 3 is obviously like a mini gimbal camera, which offers mechanical stabilization, whereas the Osmo 360 has digital stabilization, which has a couple of downsides. First of all, if you are going to shoot at low shutter speeds, like in low light conditions, or maybe if you use ND filters, although there are no ND filters for this camera yet, but regardless, if that was the case, you would get some stabilization artifacts, because 360 cameras and action cameras rely on high shutter speeds for the best stabilization performance. And this is not going to be an issue for the Pocket 3 because it's a mechanical gimbal. And now for the tracking, the Osmo 360 obviously offers 360-degree tracking because it is a 360 camera, but it does involve a bit of work in post-production with the DJI Studio. You will have to import the file, enable tracking. It's going to start tracking the subject in the frame. Sometimes it misses, sometimes it doesn't. If it's like in this case, where clearly I am the subject, it's going to do a good job, but I guess if it's going to be a bit more busy with other things in the frame, it's going to lose you a little bit. But regardless, what I'm trying to say is that it's going to take a bit of work, a bit of effort you'll have to put into it to get it done. Whereas with the Pocket 3, you have it built in because, again, it's a mechanical gimbal that can rotate around, but the rotation is limited to 270 degrees, whereas on the Osmo 360, it's 360 degrees. And now here is the same test but with the 360 camera mode, also with automatic exposure on both cameras. And while I do this test, I also want to talk about the build, difference between these cameras, specifically the overall design. So I would say the Pocket 3 is going to be definitely more fragile than the Osmo 360 because of the gimbal. Although I would say also the Osmo 360, has very delicate glass elements on the lenses. I already managed to get like a tiny little scratch on one of the lenses, but it is overall more robust. If I'm going to drop now both of these cameras, most likely the Pocket 3 will get, damaged more, I guess. And also the Osmo 360 is waterproof up to like 10 meters, I think, whereas the Pocket 3 is not. So overall, the design of the Osmo 360 is more robust than what is the Pocket 3. All right, I'm back to the single lens mode, and I got some dog food with me here. There's like a dog shelter in this leg. There's one dog behind me here, if you can see. But I'm trying to see if there are more here. I'm gonna give them some food. And here we go, they are barking. So let's feed the dogs, while doing these tests. Oh wow, there's many of them today. I brought just a little bit of food. Not gonna be enough for all of them. Yummy, yummy, yummy. Give me some food. Here we go. Oh, you open this now. Okay. And munching time. Go for it. All right, and now I'm using the 360 camera mode. I'm gonna give them some space. Now they are going to follow me because they think I have something else, but I don't. There's so many dogs behind me. No more food, I'm sorry. I just got one bag. Next time I'll buy more. No more food. Except if you consider me as food, which I hope you're not. Okay, I just want to do one test using manual exposure settings on both cameras just to see how they perform at their best settings, basically when shooting outdoors. So I've set both of them to ISO 100 to get the least amount of noise possible in the image and to get the cleanest image possible. And then I adjusted the exposure with the shutter speed to get an exposure metering of plus 0.0, basically. So let's see which one performs better. All right, and now here is 360 mode on the Osmo 360. This image, I do also want to mention a couple of other differences between these two cameras. First of all, obviously the battery, which is removable on the Osmo 360, and it is not on the Pocket 3, but the battery life is roughly the same on both of them. Also, the Pocket 3 does have autofocus, whereas the focus is fixed on the Osmo 360. So basically with the Pocket 3, you can control the focus and get more creative, if you will. For example, if I'm gonna step forward or backwards, as you can see, the focus will adjust, whereas the focus remains the same on the Osmo 360. And also the field of view difference is quite drastic between these two cameras, and the weather just went crazy. So here you get like a very wide angle field of view. And in here on the Pocket 3 is roughly equivalent when I have to move. Wow, this rain came out of nowhere. Okay, regardless, let's talk about the field of view. Obviously, there is going to be a big difference when it comes to the overall field of view between these cameras. The Osmo 360 has this fisheye look to it with a ultra wide angle field of view, which you might prefer for like reframing shots and whatnot. Whereas the Osmo Pocket 3 looks more normal, if you will, having a field of view equivalent to about 20 millimeters in full frame terms. Personally, I prefer the look of the Pocket 3, but for like action sports and if you want to reframe your shots, the Osmo 360 is going to be a bit more flexible than the Pocket 3. All right, so I feel like this should provide you enough comparisons between these two cameras to see which one has better image quality. If it was me personally, I would probably go still for the Pocket 3 because I feel like it's still going to perform slightly better in terms of like image quality in most scenarios compared to the Osmo 360. But the Osmo 360 is more versatile than the Pocket 3, allowing you to reframe your shots in post-production. And also, it can somehow replace an action camera when using the single lens mode. But I prefer image quality over versatility, so I would definitely pick the Pocket 3. But you let me know down below which one you think performs better in terms of like overall image quality, judging from the clips I've shared with you today. All right, thanks for watching.